'07, everyone. My grandfather, Donald T. Howard, was a tail gunner on B-17s during World War II. At an early age, I was in absolute awe of this fact. I read every journal and listened to every story I could, and completely infatuated with the heroism of my grandfather. I have here for you today his journals, which had almost been lost to time. In an effort to digitize and preserve his legacy, I'll be narrating them in a multi-part series I will be calling The Crew. Now, my grandfather has a disclaimer that some of these notes are coming from memory, a memory that was failing him in later years, and the notes that were being transcribed were handwritten at the time after the missions. A lot of these notes are first-hand accounts that were done immediately following the mission. That was one of the privileges of flight crews. Because they were stationed on an island nation, Great Britain, within relative safety, they were able to come back from their missions and immediately record them without any kind of censorship. You know, if you were infantry on the front lines, it would not behoove you or be allowed for you to write down your experiences, like when you had a good meal, when the last time you saw the supply trucks were, like when the last time you had a hot shower and whatnot, because if your position became overrun and your journals were captured, the enemy could use that to sort of reverse engineer what your logistic supply chains were like, and you know, how often you were being resupplied, so on and so forth. But with the air crew and the impracticality of them having their personal effects captured that were being stored safely, the air crew enjoyed much more liberty when it came to recording. However, these notes were stuffed in, suitcases at the bottom of chests for long periods of time, and my grandfather even says that some of his handwriting is very difficult to interpret. So please excuse any misrepresentation of fact. I will read exactly as it is written. The Crew. I took the entrance exam for the Air Force at Detroit early in my senior year at St. Thomas High School. John Green, one of my classmates, and I hitchhiked to Detroit to take the test. We both passed and waited to be called up. The Air Force had agreed that all high school kids taking the test would not be called up until after graduation. After graduation, I worked as a lifeguard at the Ann Arbor City beach until I got my orders to report for duty. I left from Ann Arbor, Michigan via Central Railroad on August 6, 1943, along with several Ann Arbor kids, most of whom I knew and/or went to school with. We went to Chicago and were sworn in and then shipped to Miami Beach for basic training. My flight of about 90 men lived in a small hotel right on the beach. We drilled on the street and/or on the beach. After basic training, all our flight was shipped to South Carolina Erskine College for pre-flight education, math, physics, etc. for 3 months, and then to Nashville, Tennessee for classification. From there, I was sent to Buckley Field, Denver, Colorado for armament school. We learned all about 50 cals and 30 cal machine guns, 40mm cannons, various kinds of bombs, etc. We had to be able to field strip a 50 cal machine gun, blindfolded and wearing heavy gloves. I was then sent to Gunnery School at Las Vegas, Nevada. This was a real fun school. It was almost like a penny arcade. All kinds of toys to learn the basics of gunnery. The deflections tracking, identification of aircraft, etc. We started off shooting skeet from various positions. Then they had us shooting skeet with the trap mounted on moving trucks or little rail cars. We were then loaded onto trucks driven at high speed in the opposite direction of the moving targets. The shotguns were then replaced by machine guns. The last 2 or 3 weeks of this training was at Indian Springs, about 80 miles or so from Las Vegas, in the middle of the desert, where we got to go up in a real B-17. Fighter pilots in training at another field would attack us, and we shot at each other with camera guns. Lots of fun. After training, I was given orders to report to Lincoln, Nebraska for crew assignment, with a 10-day delay en route. I, of course, went home for 10 days. At Lincoln, I was assigned to a crew. Pilot, John A. Armstrong, captain from Texas. Co-pilot, Robert L. Searfoss, lieutenant from Mexico. Navigator, James Derby, lieutenant from Lawrence. Bombardier, Tucker from L.A. Engineer, top turret, Wallace A. Barnes, sergeant from L.A. Nose gunner and later togalier, Melvin E. Wade, Lawton Ball turret gunner, Sergeant Dale Peterson, South Bend. Radio gunner, Sergeant Alvin A. Boyd, Fletcher. Waist gunner, Sergeant J. Hugh Smith, Muskegee. And tail gunner, myself, Sergeant Donald T. Howard, Ann Arbor, Michigan. All of us about 19 or 20 years old, except for the pilot, who was a career officer and about 10 years older. Also, the co-pilot was about 5 years older. The crew was then shipped to Sioux City, Iowa for combat flight training, which consisted of practice bombing runs, navigation exercises, air-to-air gunnery, formation flying, etc. It was winter, and the temperature at altitude was frequently 40 degrees below zero, and no heat in the plane, nor heated flying suits. One of my duties on the practice bombing runs was to take photos of bomb hits on the target. In a conspiracy with the rest of the crew, I would take pictures from 3 or 4 angles if the bombardier got a good hit. That made it look like several bomb runs were made. The extra bombs were then salvoed out, so we could get down to lower altitude where it's a little warmer. At the end of this training, the bombardier was taken off the crew and assigned to B-29s. Wade became the toggelier, the guy who drops the bombs but does not use a bomb sight. We were then sent to Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, where we boarded a ship and sailed for England. We landed at Southampton and assigned to the 305th Heavy Bombardment Group at Charleston. Once there, we were further assigned to the 365th Squadron. The first couple of days at this base were taken up with orientation talks, issue of flying equipment, etc. The war came to us a lot sooner than I had expected. The first night I was pretty excited about being in the ETO and could not get to sleep. Trying to sleep on 3 hard biscuits instead of a mattress didn't help much either. My bunk in the 10 Quonset hut was right next to a guy, a flight engineer by the name of Joe A. Sola from Philadelphia. Maybe sometime around 4 a.m. or so, he woke up out of a sound sleep and started to yell, "That fucker is gonna crash. Everybody in the shelter." The bomb shelter was just outside of our hut, and we were all headed for it. On the way, I looked up and saw a B-17 headed right for us, and was clipping off telephone poles. He was really struggling to get some altitude. It flew just over the top of the shelter and then crashed in a field just beyond us. I started out of the shelter thinking I might be able to rescue some of the crew, but Joe grabbed me and pulled me back yelling, "That other fucker's gonna crash too!" Sure enough, here comes another B-17 struggling to get altitude and not doing very well at it. It swerved to the left and then crashed just beyond the 366 Squadron housing site. All 11 crew members of both planes were killed. None could be rescued, as their entire load of 500-pound bombs kept exploding. A few days later, some of the crew flew their first mission. The pilots and others flew with other crews, but I did not. My first mission was coming up, and its story will be written up as follows.